So this is hands down the coolest set I have reviewed on RevReads. From the look of it to the content, this set is awesome and it is big. Here is volume 1 and volume number 2 and volume number 3. And we are talking about a commentary on the New Testament from the Talmud and Midrash from Strack and Billerbeck. This is a 2022 Lexham Press release of a work originally published in the German language in 1928 and then translated by Andrew Bowden and Joseph Longarino. This set is awesome. Now it's big too, trying to hold it all up so you can see it together. It's going to be on the pricey end for some of the audience. For others, they may think that this price is a steal. Currently, the 3-volume set is listed for $159 on Lexham's website, and it's going for $131 on Amazon. But I think this one is worth its weight in gold. If I wasn't reviewing books on RevReads, this is a set that I would be setting all my pennies aside in order to purchase. The amount of enlightening and revealing information that you can pull out of this set from the writings of the Jewish community during and after the days of the New Testament is astounding. Even the information that I read that wasn't helpful for my exegesis of the passage at hand was still really interesting to read. Now, I haven't read all of these 3 volumes in their entirety. I've read the preface, the introduction, and looked up random text and passages for sermon prep and to prepare for this review. And while I already had high hopes that this set would be useful, it really surpassed my expectations. I would go as far as to say if a student or a scholar is doing serious work in New Testament studies, you should count this as required reading for any passage. Serious PhD seminary professors, instructors in the New Testament, I don't know how you could not want to have this on your shelf, and it is a beautiful 3-volume work. What Strack and Billerbeck did was kind of mind-blowing, considering the amount of work that it would have taken them, but they poured through who knows how many pages in Jewish writings to unearth the passages in the Talmud and Midrash that relate to the New Testament. Now, some passages clearly served as a background on a New Testament text. For instance, when Jesus discussed the parable in Matthew 16:2, when it is evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. That was not just a common everyday saying of the time, but there are multiple uses of that proverb from the Talmud along the same lines of thinking. So Jesus was using their own religious teachings to confront them. And Strack and Billerbeck provide you the background for the context that Christ is referring to. So I think anyone should be able to see how useful this volume would be. And if you have a few moments, I would like to tell you some more things you should know about this book and some more things that I found from the introduction by David Instone Brewer. And I'll also let you know about a couple of things I discovered already while reading it. Welcome to RevReads. If you want to discover more books that will let us know about the world of the biblical authors, please subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with my latest reviews. Also, like and share this video with others to help them know about the great work by Lexham Press. And I want to say a big thank you to the Buy Me a Coffee members whose support allows me to cover all of the costs that come with keeping up with RevReads, putting out these new reviews. And if you have benefited from RevReads, I would love for you to consider supporting the channel at a membership of only $3 a month. So let's talk about a few points to know regarding this series, and then I will give you some examples of what you can find inside. First, the purpose of this series is to illustrate the New Testament from ancient rabbinic writings. Now, I'm not a big fan of that use of illustrate in the introduction because I think that word's kind of vague, but maybe it's meant to say, I might prefer to say that this series provides the Judaic context of the writings of the New Testament. There are clearly times when Jesus in his teachings and the apostolic authors in their writers confront, make use of, and challenge the mindset of first century Judaism. And Strack and Billerbeck provide you with the references of the Jewish writings that possibly intersect with the New Testament. Now, a few warnings are given in the use of this series. First, it should not be used to try and reconstruct first century Jewish views. This is in no way a comprehensive coverage of the first century Jewish worldview. It's a very spotty look because we're just showing you the places where quotes from the Talmud and the Midrash have aligned with what we see in the New Testament. So a lot is left out. Second, be wary that you don't have the context around the quotations that are brought from the Talmud and Midrash. Now, some of the quotes in this book are as short as a single sentence. A lot of other ones are a paragraph. So be careful about reading too much into what is here, since the broader context is not provided for you. I think warnings 1 and 2 really go together. The third warning, this series was accused of holding to a Lutheran bias. Now, I didn't recognize Lutheran bias when I was reading it, but maybe that's because the bias is said to be in relation to salvation through faith alone, and then also viewing the Jews as teaching salvation by works. And I'd be in agreement with that bias, so I probably wouldn't catch it as a reader myself, but it's been said to be there. Fourth, we should be wary about the dates that are provided in connection with the quotations in this book. There are numerous reasons that I don't have time to go through in this review on why dating sections of the Talmud and Midrash are very difficult. It's hard to know sometimes that if a view that was recorded in the Talmud, maybe in the 400s, might have been interacting with a view that was already present hundreds of years earlier. But we can't know for certain, so we should not take any of the dates as definite. And a final warning is that there are a lot of quotes in this book where, if I'm honest, there's a lot of quotes that frankly aren't helpful. Strack and Billerbeck seemed to take the line of reasoning, if it could even possibly in any way be related to the New Testament, let's include it. So there's stuff to wade through that's not pertinent to the New Testament passage at hand, which I gotta say isn't a big deal if you're using it as a reference work, looking up individual passages at a time. But I would also say that this would make this book kind of awful to read all the way through. So those are the warnings that largely come from the work of David Instone in his introduction to the English translation, and I see no reason to disagree with what he already recorded. So I hope that will enlighten you a little bit on your decision of whether or not to purchase this series. Again, I'm encouraging you to do so if you have the financial ability to do so. But here are a few examples of what you'll find in this series. One of the longest sections in this series is on Jesus's genealogy in Matthew chapter 1. And interestingly enough, there's a lot of quotations and traditions surrounding Rahab, such as Rahab was one of the 4 most beautiful women who ever lived, along with Sarah, Abigail, and Esther. And also, Rahab was 10 years old when Israel began their wilderness wandering, and then she was a prostitute for 40 years, and then became a proselyte at the age of 50. Rahab is also an ancestor to Jeremiah and Ezekiel. I share that to give you an idea of the flavor of some of the, it's not really going to help you in your sermon prep or your study of the New Testament passage, but it's still kind of interesting at the same time. Then skipping to Matthew chapter 15, when Jesus speaks to the Canaanite woman, and he tells her it's not good for the dog to eat the children's food at the table. This series presents all the places where Jews called Gentiles dogs in rabbinic writings. And there's this really interesting story in the Babylonian Talmud of a rabbi who named his dogs after the tyrant Rufus and his wife. And Rufus was furious that a dog was named after him. And the rabbi used Rufus's own anger to illustrate why the Jews don't make idols and then name them after the Lord, because that would be deeply insulting to God, more so than naming a dog after a human king. And then another example in Acts chapter 18, verse 18, Paul had his hair cut in relation to a vow. which seems kind of odd coming up where it does, and the commentary. This set covers all of the known passages that they could find where Jewish individuals took vows, why they took vows, what did they do in relation to keeping those vows. And I found those references to be the most helpful background material I could find on what Luke might have been referring to with Paul's vow and his haircut in Acts chapter 18. So, in grand scheme, here's what I think about a commentary on the New Testament from the Talmud and the Midrash by Strack and Billerbeck. At times, it's not all that helpful in understanding a passage at hand, but at other times, it's very helpful, providing you with excellent background information that I don't think you're going to find anywhere else. And this series is almost always interesting to read. This is just such an excellent set. It's beautiful. It's well crafted. Don't neglect the introduction if you purchase it. Great work by Lexham Press to bring this work to the English-speaking world.